Hello, my name is Leslie Nugent and welcome to Wellness Saturday. So a couple weeks ago we talked about the DIF equation that Barbara Gill wrote about in her book Changed by a Child. And we unpacked the idea that Barbara is saying that we live a life with incidents of duration and intensity and frequency that the rest of the world could never imagine, right? And now we overlay that with the pandemic and all the stress that we're going through with that, and we are carrying a pretty heavy load. And it feels to me that self-compassion, or putting on our own oxygen mask first, like the pilot says on the airplane, that is, I think, first and foremost, the most important thing we can be doing right now for ourselves and for our families. And I think with all this stress going on and all this DIF, it's important to consider that there's two other things that are probably going on in our lives that we're not paying close attention to. And one is grief. It's collective grief and it's individual grief. We are grieving. And the second is that our nervous systems are burned out. So I want to start with grief first and consider an article in one of the Harvard periodicals from March 2020. And the title of the article is "The Discomfort You Are Feeling is Called Grief." And it really struck me when I read that, because I thought, am I grieving? And as I read the article, I realized, boy, I am grieving. And I think we all are. David Kessler is a grief expert. He wrote the book with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross about the 5 stages of grief. And he says, pay attention to where you are in your grief. Because they say there's 5 stages, right? Denial, we've got bargaining, anger, bargaining, sadness, and acceptance. 5 stages of grief. Take a look at the news the next time you have the TV on or your computer on. We got denial. Some of us are out there denying that this virus is all that big a deal, and we are wanting to go back to our beauty parlors and our tattoo shops. I mean, we're not buying that this is such a big deal. That's grief. It's grief. And then we've got angry people. Some of us are out there marching and protesting. We got to get back to work, stop the nonsense. That's grief. We're grieving. And then how about bargaining? I think I'm a bargainer. I'm staying home 3 weeks or 3 months. I'm staying home. And then when I come out, it's going to be normal, right? Maybe. That's grief. That's grief. And then how about sadness? Some of us are watching the news and have our computers on and we are dying. I mean, we can't stop crying because there's so much injustice and so much pain out there. That's grief. And acceptance. That's another stage of grief. Some of us are like, okay, this is the deal, and I'm going to deal with it. It is what it is. That's grief. That's part of grieving. And actually, Kessler says there's another stage beyond that. He says it's called meaning making. And it's when we're able to integrate all those other stages and be able to say, you know what? I've learned something from this, and I'm going to integrate that learning into my life. So here's a question. Where are you in this grief, individually and collectively? And are you honoring this grief? Are you taking time to sit with it, not to rush it, not to shortcut it, but to really be tender with it and to unpack it? Because here's the thing about grief. It's very tricky. And grief, if it's not processed, will absolutely undo you. And it'll come out sideways, right? If we're healthy, we can find meaning. If we're unhealthy, boom, the grief sneaks out all over everybody that we love. So that's the first question. The second one is, how about your nervous system? How's your nervous system doing? Because mine's pretty fried. And, we've got this miraculous system in us. We've got this parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system, right? And both of those are designed to help us mitigate threat. And boy, are we under threat right now. And so the parasympathetic is sort of the brakes on our nervous system. It kind of calms us down. And the sympathetic, it activates, it's the gas pedal. And it says, okay, it's time to fight or flight, right? So it's pretty magic that we've got that. But here's a true confession. My husband and I, a couple of weeks ago, 34 years of marriage, at each other's throats. I mean, we were fighting big time. And I couldn't understand it. And I said to a friend of mine who's a therapist, I said, why are we doing this right now? And she said, you know what? Your nervous systems are crashing into each other. Wow. That was a huge wake-up call for me because I realized she was right. Because when I get activated, right, I become a fighter. I get engaged. When my husband gets activated, when he feels triggered with trauma or some kind of threat, he shuts down. And so we're doing this dance of fighting and flighting, and we crashed into each other. So the question I've got is, are you crashing into anybody? Because it's important we pay attention to that right now. Now there's something called the polyvagal theory, and it's kind of crazy science, and I won't get into the details of it, but it's very cool, and it says that we have something magical in this nervous system, and it's called the ventral vagus nerve. And doctors have figured out that we actually have a way of activating and tapping into our nervous system to calm ourselves down. Pretty fabulous. And so I like to call it the 4 B's. And what they say is that first we have to start with our body. Second, our breathing. Third, our buddies, right? Our people, the people we love. And fourth, befriending negativity. So let's look at it real quick. Body scanning, body scanning. We have to pay attention to what our body is doing from a nervous system standpoint. So if we close our eyes and we think about where we are feeling the tension in our body, and then the second one is breathing deeply into those body parts to open them up, right? I'm talking belly breathing, deep belly breaths. That can help our body to calm and relax. There's research on this, you guys. The cortisol reduces when we deeply breathe, and if we exhale longer than we inhale in deep breathing, it promotes calmness. The third one is befriending negativity. Like some of us are really catastrophizers or worst case scenario people, and it's because that's how we protect ourselves, and those are great skills. But sometimes we've got to give ourselves other options, because when we get really, really super stressed, we can really get too tied down to that. So it's important that you pay attention to when you're being negative, and then give yourself some other options. And the last one is buddy connection. Who do you love in your life? Who do you feel safe with? And find a way to be with them, eye-to-eye contact. And if it has to be on FaceTime or on Zoom, so be it, because that makes a difference. That calms our nervous system. So here's the deal, guys. We are grieving mightily, and we need to pay attention to how do we give ourselves compassion? How do we be more compassionate, easier on ourselves, let ourselves be in a survival mode, lower our expectations, and pay attention to where we're grieving, and let ourselves grieve. Because if we don't, the grief will find its way, and it's not pretty. And the other is our nervous system. Let's read our body. Let's do our deep breathing. Let's pay attention to finding safety with eye contact with those we love. And by golly, let's find a way to befriend some negativity. Give ourselves options. This is good science, and it's good for the soul. Be well.